Possession crucial from this. How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. It's over the bar. Oh, holy Moses.
Hello and welcome to the RTÉ GAA Podcast. This week I'm delighted to say I'm joined by RTÉ pundit Colm O'Rourke. We have, as always, Sunday Game series producer Rory O'Neill and the GAA correspondent of the Irish Examiner, John Fogarty. How are we all doing, lads?
Good, Mikey.
Very good.
Right, we have a bit of news to catch up on today, which is kind of helps. Not that much, enough. We won't keep you too long, folks, but we'll keep you long enough. The GPA held their AGM last night, and beforehand they released their annual report for 2019. Paul Flynn did some interviews, and he told our own Damien Lawler that the GPA are currently negotiating their deal with the GAA, which people may or may not know. They get 2.5 million, isn't that right? Or they get a cut of the commercial revenue, whichever is higher. And last year they were paid, in 2018 they were paid 3.5 million. And this deal is up. John, can you just explain to us? This deal it expired last year, but it's kind of still in place because the new deal hasn't been signed off on.
That's exactly it, Mikey. 15% of commercial revenue or a baseline of 2.5 million. So whatever's the highest, that's really what they get. Now, negotiations broke down at the end of last year. It broke down quite significantly. Like John Horn and Paul Flynn might be two dubs, but they haven't exactly seen eye to eye. And, you know, it would rally against some of the arguments out there that the GPA are just an arm of or a limb of the GAA in some shape or form. No, there's been a couple of good rows between them, all right, and it was down to finances. John Horan said that. I don't think that went down too well with the GPA, that John was so forthcoming with the details about why the negotiations broke down, but it was about funding, so it was always going to be about finances, really. But 12 months previously, John Horan wasn't happy with Paul Flynn when it came to the experimental rules and how, you know, they were against the hand pass, if you remember that, which, you know, Paul Flynn made some very strong points about that. But at the same time, the GPA had representation on the Playing Rules Committee that put forward the hand pass, or the 3 hand pass limit rule, which obviously died a death very quickly before the league. So there has been a running battle of sorts. So, you know, COVID, obviously, it couldn't have come at a worse time for the GPA in the sense of funding. And we're all aware of the wage cuts or the salary cuts that have taken place in the GAA. But by extension, it's my understanding that has also happened in the GPA as well. Basically, they have to cut their cloth for the measure, and that wasn't, as far as I'm aware, that wasn't mentioned yesterday, but that is the reality that they're facing at the moment, as much as, you know, some of the details or some of the figures from the 2019 accounts, Mikey, are quite impressive.
Yeah. Colm, the conversation can only be about money, really. Donal O'Neill, the co-founder of the GPA, was on News Talk yesterday, and he was quite blunt about it. He said they got advice from Jerry Adams before they went in to do a deal, and, you know, Jerry Adams told them, go in and, you know, just pay for blood, because you'll only do this deal once. And they've done it, and I think anybody would agree financially the deal is very good for the GPA. But from a strategic point of view, and you've made this point yourself before, strategically it's a great deal for the GAA because they do have a partner more than an enemy now, even if the two sides are at loggerheads when it comes to deal renewal time.
Yeah, well, I thought at the time that the GAA folded very easy and handed over money, but I suppose that was at a time when there seemed to be money all around for everything. But to hand one group, it nearly amounts, I think, to about 6 million in total. Is that right, John?
That would be right, including the expenses, which basically go through the county board's column. Yeah.
Yes. So, like, it's a massive amount of money. Like, when I look at it and I say, okay, we need to look after inter-county players, but 6 million in terms of grants to clubs, maybe, who are really struggling to get things sorted out for underage players, I think that it is been a bad deal. And of course, we're stuck with it now, and it's going to be there for all time. Of course, there's no commercial income this year, so there will be no money to be paid out. So I presume that the GPA will have to cut back. I saw the amount of programs that were touted in their annual report. I'm not exactly clear on what to spend all this money on, but they listed out huge amounts of different programs and thousands of players availing of them. I don't exactly know what availing of certain programs are. Well, maybe I'm a bit slow in that regard, but I think that far too much money going to the GPA.
Rory, I had a good look at the annual report yesterday as a journalist looking for a newsline, and myself and a couple of other guys looked at it. And in the end, we couldn't really see a newsline because, as Colm said, a lot of these programs, I'd say they're very admirable, and I'd say they are great for intercounty players. We had a piece a couple of weeks ago, the Wexford footballer who started the cafe with help from the GPA, kind of business classes, kind of not money, but more kind of education. They do a lot of good, but as Colm says, when you look through the report, there was very little in there that would grab you and say, oh, well, that's juicy, or, oh, well, that we didn't know that before, that's interesting. And again, just to go back to Donal O'Neill, like he said, there's a whiff of the civil service off it, which for a co-founder of the GPA to say it's quite a statement.
It certainly is. It's not exactly the kind of statement you would want somebody who was as radical as he was to describe where your organisation is now. But I've had many arguments with, and plenty of discussions with Don Logue, who obviously would have been a big GPA advocate down through the years. And one thing that's always come back to me from him on this, in terms of the programs that they run, is that by and large, people don't understand the amount of good work that they do. And he'll go into detail for you. Now, they're very poor at articulating that, demonstrating, illustrating. They just don't sell their message well at all, and it's a very damaged brand. I think they would even accept that themselves at this stage, that the term GPA now has a very kind of a pejorative, a toxic almost atmosphere surrounding it, and it's not great. Now, if you compare that with, we'll say, most people's attitude towards intercounty players in general, it's a very contrasting view. But it goes back to a discussion that you and I might have had many, many moons ago in another podcast. I would always be of the view, and I know this is only my own theory, and I'd love to hear Colm's views on this because he was partly responsible. But if you go back and look at the genesis of the GPA, GPA was founded in 1999, right? So that's the GPA saddles right in between the opening of the back door in 1997 in hurling and the introduction of the back door in 2001 in football. To my mind, the proliferation of games at intercounty level, which was led chiefly by the GAA themselves, the introduction of sponsorship, commercial revenues, TV sponsorships, multi-platform sponsorships, corporate boxes, jersey sponsorships, all of that. Adding into the mix with all of your back doors, front doors, your round robins, your extra games, the extra pressures that have been brought to bear upon the intercounty player meant they felt, when this originally came into existence, they needed a voice. They needed somebody to articulate their views because they were being asked to do more and more and more for less and less and less. And gone are the days, as we all know, I remember it well myself, where an intercounty player to play a couple of matches over the course of the season. He gets a handy job in the bank or a handy job in the local brewery. He plays the day with his club, and Bob's your uncle. Those days are over. So they needed a voice because they needed some class of representation. The reality is they don't want anybody else but the GPA to represent them. So we may as well just accept that. I think their biggest problem is one of image and one of lack of understanding. But I go back to the key point that I will always make. The GPA the inception and the incarnation has been brought about by the GAA themselves.
Yeah, and that would mirror, John, wouldn't it, if you look at the AFL, very, I won't say cozy, but there's a very formal relationship. And the same in most of the American sports as well. The unions are, they nearly all come under the same roof as the NFL and the NFL's professional players union. They do tend to have very close relationships. It seems to be how it develops in in professional sports as well. I suppose the question is, should it be different in an amateur sport, or are the GPA a professional entity within an amateur organisation, so to speak?
Well, there was reasons, Mikey, to be very suspicious of the GPA at the outset. Now, there was a lot of brinksmanship, don't get me wrong, and Donal O'Neill was at the forefront of that, but Desi Farrell was too, and Donal to not in a lesser extent, but certainly with Desi. But even the GPA emblem, the logo was modelled on the NBA, NFL, those type of things. Those connotations didn't help. The fact that they were, I think there was a famous line from Donal Logue about volunteerism and that he didn't buy into that line. And then Enda McNulty was saying that the person who was playing on All-Ireland final day was more important than the person sweeping the dressing room. Those things, they were incendiary in a way, and they were meant to be incendiary because basically they were standing for themselves and they had to do that. Now, when Desi stepped down, what is it, 4 years ago now, nearly 4 years ago now, and Desi stepped down, he left. He did all that he could do. Colm mentioned the fact that it was a bad deal that was done. Absolutely, from money-wise, it looks like it was a bad deal. But Aegon Farrell, who would have signed off on that, John Horn, who was on one side of the negotiation committee, and that was another, by the way, set of talks that broke down as well. They would argue that the GAA now have a finger in every pie that the GPA have. Every committee, there is some sort of influence from the GAA. They can tick off. You could almost argue that the GPA have been subsumed to that extent. Now, obviously, they still flex their muscles, as is their right to do so. But there was reasons to be suspicious. I take Rory's point that there was a communication or a failure to communicate there for a good while. I think that's improving. I think they're a little bit, obviously they're still a bit peeved about a few things. Certainly I thought they went about it the wrong way as regards their reaction to Tom Ryan's annual report earlier this year when they were talking about the intercounty players almost being the problem child. I don't know where they got that from, as much as the 30 million figure was mentioned by Tom Ryan in terms of the intercounty expenditure. I don't think it was necessarily a dig at the intercounty players, but that was the way it was conflated anyway by the GPA. But I genuinely believe under Paul Flynn anyway, there is an attempt to reach out and to communicate better than they have been doing.
Yeah, and I suppose, Colm, you would to an extent be one of their targets in this communication because you are pretty forthright in your opinions on the GPA, which are not usually positive, shall we say.
Do you think the players need a union, Colm?
I do. The strangest thing about this was that I was part of the original players' union, which was set up back in the 1970s, and Robbie Kelleher from Dublin and Johnny Callanan from Clare, and we found it difficult to get off the ground because it was more or less ignored by the GAA at the time. And I was supportive of the moves to set up an independent players organisation, but it's just the way that it has developed. And I think Rory made the point about, very few people will have a good word to say about them. But I think the personalities that were involved at the time, and particularly the type of stuff that they went on with and maybe still go on with trips to America, high profile sort of banquets and bringing Americans over to play golf in Ireland. And a lot of people will say, well, what the hell has this got to do with football or with players? And especially taking maybe some of the money out in New York and Boston and places which would be better served to develop football and hurling in those sort of places. And it has caused much aggravation in those cities. So if you mention the word GPA to most club players, they would really frown at it. And I think Rory's point,
like Jarlath Burns reckons they're detested. Is he overstating things?
Maybe a little bit, but I think the word that you use is a sort of a toxic brand, and I think that Paul Flynn, personally and professionally, would be very, very good fellow, and I think would be popular among players and would be popular. But like a county board officials, definitely, I think the word detest would be the word most appropriate for the relationship between county board officials who would see that GAA at central level has folded in the negotiations and given them away a lot of money that could have gone back into counties. So I think that they have a big image problem, maybe as much as anything else.
Isn't the irony there, Colm, though, that the players and club players and the average fan might say that a lot of county boards around the country have folded to the demands of inter-county managers, and that is driving as much of this kind of, to use the phrase used by the CPA and stuff, to kind of this kind of move towards elitism. Like, that's the players do what they're told, and you could argue the county managers are the ones who are kind of creating more problems than the players.
I would say you're quite correct in that, and the players are, I'm amazed, players seem to be like sheep anymore, and there's very few strong individual voices emerge from different counties. There's very few strong personalities seem to be playing, and there's very few of them willing to say.
It's an interesting point. I'm sorry to cut across your column. It is an interesting point, because one of the kind of strong individual, we'll say, very interesting characters would be someone like Jack McCaffrey, who's walked away.
Yes. Yeah, well, like, I don't hear anybody saying this whole thing is bullshit and I'm not going to have any part in training 5 nights a week or whatever. And this is at a time when the playing population of inter-county players are probably supposedly the most intelligent, certainly the best educated, and they seem to be willing to take any sort of punishment and put up with it. I'm amazed by it. Certainly, like the way that some county teams are flogging their players wouldn't be accepted in my time. And it's also interesting that Paul Flynn did say that Dublin trained less probably than nearly any other county team.
John, we had Donald Ogan on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, and like he makes his arguments in a very convincing way. Like he's very passionate about the GPA still as the lifetime president, and like he used the line, and I think it was picked up by your own newspaper as well, that if a lot of people had their way, and get rid of the GPA, and the GA would go back to having the profile of the League of Ireland B, I think was the expression he used. That's a little drastic, obviously, but like it is a fair thing to say that the inter-county player is the GAA's cash cow, isn't it?
There's no denying that, and the Club Players Association agreed that as well in a joint statement with the GPA last year as well, Mikey. That has to be remembered, and again, we have to keep on repeating ourselves that the inter-county player is a club player too, and will start as a club player and end as a club player. That has to be said. But there's no denying that. There's no denying that it funds so much of what the GAA is about, and it's amazing. I remember Liam Mulvihill saying it years ago that one of the major issues he had was towards the end of the year, it gave people too much time to reflect on things, and usually it was around that time. Not that it was the silly season. Yeah, it was, Rory. Yeah. But sure, every November we know that November's almost GPA season at this moment in time. We're all right in some shape or form. It's almost as if, right, that's the box to tick, and we're all like that. I'm not saying that about one or two columnists. It's all of us. But
it'll be different this year, John. It'll be provincial finals time.
Well, yes, exactly. We'll have plenty to talk about then, Mikey, and write about. But they are, we can't get away from the fact that they are the showcase. That they are the reason why inter-county managers have been calling for county to go first was, number one, obviously they felt it was safer. I believe it was safer as well, county to go before club, and not to be putting so many club players in the firing line, so to speak. That's probably too strong an expression, but if you could have put the county season first and had 2 months there would have been a great showcase for the players. They might have been behind closed doors, but at the same time, it would have been an opportunity for the GA to try and accrue or trying to claw back some of the media money, some of the commercial money that they need. Let's be honest with you, they need. And Tom Ryan's, from speaking to him a couple of months ago, he's saying that come the 31st of October, the GA accounts are going to be pretty easy to do this year, but it is the one
not much coming in, John, and plenty going out.
Absolutely. It'll be very interesting to see the intercounty expenditure and what can be spent from the 14th of September until, an All-Ireland winning team the Saturday or the Saturday for the footballers, anyway, the Saturday before Christmas, Rory. That'll be very interesting. But we can't go back to, and I know some people are calling for it and thinking it's almost utopian. It's not utopian to have a knockout championship at intercounty level in any way, shape or form. What was being done before the pandemic was some very good work as regards the Fixtures Review Committee in the proposals that they were putting forward. Now, I wouldn't be for the status quo. I do believe something has to change, whether it's the four provincial conferences of 8 teams based on the provinces, or whether it's flipping the league or championship. I don't mind either, to be honest with you. I just think something has to change. And what also has to be mentioned about the GPA as well is that they were on this Fixtures Review Committee. They didn't step off it like the CPA, and I can understand why the CPA did it to focus minds. But what the GPA, they were on that group that wants to give more time back to the clubs, wants to give 3 weeks more time back to the clubs. But I think this year has given us even more of an idea, maybe more time, more of a meaningful time should be given back to the clubs, at the same time not damaging what is the showcase, which is the Intercounty Championships.
Notwithstanding the fact that probably nobody wants to go back to a straight knockout permanent. Well, some people probably do, but I think, the Intercounty, a bit bigger of a window. Colm, could this year perhaps give us kind of some idea on how to fix a couple of problems? A, the club and county balance, which everybody seems to agree is out of whack. And secondly, that figure, 29.74 million spent on intercounty teams last year, which Tom Ryan is concerned about and everybody should be concerned about. A, counties won't probably have enough time to spend that much money this year unless they really push the boat out. And secondly, the county boards don't have the money to spend. So outs are going to have to be tightened, aren't they?
Well, I think everybody agreed that there should be a tightening up of this, and the idea that county teams are training 4 or 5 times a week is absolutely ludicrous, and when there should be personal responsibility to get fit. This sort of constant conflict going on as to what involves amateurism anymore, and of course maybe Dean Rock brought that to a head last week with his advertisement about his free-taking skills. And at the same time, you have the intercounty player who again, the GPA represent. And the point that Rory was making is the county player themselves are held in very high esteem almost everywhere. And the group that supposedly represents them are held in very low esteem. So there's this constant widening of boundaries as to what constitutes proper amateurism. Where do we want to go with the organisation? The GPA say that they are only looking after player welfare issues. But if you have more and more county games and more money and more commercialism, you're obviously going to put pressure on the GPA to negotiate more and more for their individual players. I think that central to all of this, and the GPA have been poor in representing a new fixture situation. I think the flipping of the league and the championship, it would be a good start. After I was on the committee that brought in the back door, which is 20 years ago now, and at that time I had hoped that some other smart body would come on within 3 or 4 or 5 years and come up with a better system, that it should have evolved and moved on from that. Now, I have my own ideas and radical ideas. I think the whole provincial system is broken down and I think it needs to be replaced. But maybe as, again, another step to having a better fixture system would be flipping the league and championship. This idea that Leitrim and Wicklow and Wexford and Fermanagh and all these counties play in the All-Ireland Championship and treated the same as Dublin and Kerry and Tyrone, it's just ludicrous, and it's not doing anything for the promotion of the game. And it's the reason why so many players in these counties are reluctant after the league to get involved. They much prefer to go to America for the summer than get beaten twice in the championship.
Yeah.
Mikey, I think it comes back to, and we didn't mention yet, the ESRI report, the famous ESRI report in the 31 hours. You know, after that, the GPA felt that they were, almost weaponized by the thing, and that, going into the next round of a fund negotiations, they could say, point at this and go, well, listen, you need to give us more money here to look after these guys. Whereas the GAA were looking at it and going, Jesus, I think Tom Ryan used the word sobering about some of the statistics and the 31 hours. They were looking at it as an opportunity almost to cut costs in a way, and you can see that as well. The 14th of September, as far as I'm concerned, is a cost-cutting mechanism more than anything else. And now the GA, by asking clubs to report on counties, have made it's almost become a philosophical thing more than anything else. But that is, it comes down to that. At the same time, from the GA or GPA AGM yesterday, what was very positive about it was, I think there's a recognition now that, and they're certainly getting it from the players who are stepping away after leagues, as Colm says, are stepping away for the year. Like, we're going to have, I would imagine, up to 24 players playing in the championship later this year who wouldn't have been playing on it otherwise because they were heading off, and now they've come back. The likes of Gary Brennan, Michael Quinlivan, guys in Longford, you know what I mean? These guys we're going to have them now, and a part of that is, number one, obviously COVID, but the attractiveness of a condensed season. Again, I come back to it. I'm not in favour of a knockout championship. I do believe there's an excitement to it this year, but it has to be squeezed for the sake of the players. I think Colin mentioned the fact that they're supposed to be the most intelligent and educated. They certainly are, and you can see them with the likes of Jack McCaffrey, guys who can shout stop. If the GPA inform or educate players to say stop more and to say no more to managers, then I think they are fulfilling a purpose and being a proper union.
Yeah, and Rory, I think this point was made by Donal Óg as well, is like, why should it be the responsibility of the GPA and the players to fix fixtures or to fix burnout? There has to be a central responsibility for how the competitions are structured, and I think it's fair to say that doesn't rest with the players. They can have their input either in the manner of Jack McCaffrey walking away, or in the manner of the countless surveys the GPA do, or the CPA do, which most people don't listen to. But at the end of the day, the buck stops with Croke Park and with their bodies in the county boards, really, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And to be fair, that's the one point that you would have to accept from Paul Flynn, who I heard speaking this morning on a rival radio station, and from with Donal Óg last 2 weeks, that like they can have their input on trying to sort out a more coherent fixtures calendar, but ultimately that's not their main raison d'etre. Like Flannery even said it himself. They've now become a player welfare. They're not a union anymore, so to speak. They're a player welfare organisation, and they're his words. So that's what they have defined themselves as. And if you're to take that definition, then I presume of looking at the report and their annual accounts, etc. Like the only conclusion to draw from that is that they're actually fulfilling their function quite well. I think what's going to become, and sorry to kind of shift gears ever so slightly, because this is something that I had in my head there when the lads were mentioning the figure, the 27.4 or 29.74, and the sheer costs that are going to be associated with running intercounty championships, which are still going to be significant. You are still looking at an intercounty session, which is probably more expensive now, given the constraints and confines that you've got to do it under COVID and all the extra little added things that you're going to have to throw into the mix. But if you, Kevin McStay's book, like the average cost of an intercounty training session can run from anywhere from between $3,500 to about $6,000, depending on where lads are traveling from and depending on what kind of facilities they're putting in place. Now, once September 14th kicks in, you are then looking at that treadmill starting to run again. Now, that might be fine for the Dublin County Board, and it isn't, by the way, because Dublin has the exact same problems as everywhere else. In fact, Dublin's are probably more acute to a certain extent, given the size and the number of fixtures they have to run off. But once that treadmill starts to kick back in again, like you think about, like let's take a county like Carlow, for instance, right? They have nothing coming in now on any of their gate receipts. They have no intercounty fixtures. They have no league games where there's money coming in. Their sponsors have probably experienced issues and trouble in terms of their layoffs and COVID issues themselves. So their income now has been severely restricted. They now or even Laois would be probably even a better example, because they'd be a hurling and a football where they'd be expected to compete at a reasonably high level, and they have two managers that are on, expenses, we'll say, right? Traveling from outside the county. Like, that's going to be very, very significant costs for them. Laois might go deep into the football championship. Let's say they get to a Leinster final, the draw looks favourable for them. I think they can possibly, as a Dublin semi, they might run into. The hurlers will probably, you'll have a backdoor situation there, so they might be going for 7 or 8 weeks. Like, all these county boards were all in really straightened times before COVID ever came along. And now they have all of this thrown into the mix. And that's the point that I'd be making. Like, Paul Flynn is looking to get a deal done with John Horn. I'd say Paul is going to have to join the queue, and it's a long queue. And, there's going to be a lot of county boards, a lot of provincial councils, sports organisations in general are all in trouble. And I think what's going to have to be, people are going to have to understand that whatever went before is out the window.
You're talking, Rory, about chicken and egg here, because you have more and more games, more and more training sessions. It's taking more and more money. There's a very simple solution to this, that if county teams cut down on the amount of training sessions they were having.
But can you trust counties? Can you trust counties to do that, though, Colm? Can you really?
Okay. No, but what you're ending up then with is throwing more and more money at a problem. And then, of course, the GPA situation is the same, because they're saying they have to deal with more mental stress and all these sort of problems that never seemed to be an issue in the past. And if you had less demands on county players, obviously there would be less need for a lot of the sort of work that they are telling us that they're doing. I have no doubt that they're doing a lot of good work in that regard.
Can you see, people talk about this pandemic column being a bit of a wake-up call, and some people might look at how much foreign travel they're doing. Other people are looking at their work-life balance because things have been reset outside their control, and they realize that maybe what they were doing before was not good for them, not good for the planet, not good for their family, not good for their health. Do you think there's any chance that this has a similar effect on the GAA, and they look at it and say, we'd created a monster, things were out of control, we were spending too much money, our seasons were too long, our players were under too much stress, now we have a chance to rip it up and start again?
Yes, well, I'd love to think that, and John made a few very valid points in that context, but I don't see it happening. But I think we should get back. The GAA is a player-driven organisation, and that only about 2 or 3% of those players are the elite. And it's very important that we ensure that the 96 or 7% are catered for properly, that we have good fixtures at all levels, at underage and at adult, and that the GAA is run on the basis of a community organisation there for the health and well-being of its members, to have good family involvement, to have good, healthy outdoor activities. They're the principles on which it is based, not some massive organisation at the very tip of it, which is possible to run as well. But I often think that the tail is wagging the dog in a big way, and it's getting worse. It would have been an opportunity during this time for a comprehensive fixtures review. It's not that difficult. You have to start out with the club at the centre of it, not the county. It's always looked the wrong way around, in my opinion. You can't solve fixture problems by saying we'll shove in club when counties are not busy or when there's not big games on. That's the wrong premise to start with, and you're always going to get the wrong result.
John, you're a GAA correspondent, so for a national newspaper, this issue that we've kind of come on to now, naturally enough, because it's what it always comes back to. It's probably what you write about more than anything else, more than football or hurling on their own. You write about this kind of culture war within the GAA, and doing exactly what Colm says. Is there ambition, let's say, in the GAA to reconcile this idea of a community organisation which also houses an elite professional sports organisation?
I think this year is going to force the GAA in a way to accelerate a move towards that, Mikey, in a way, because there is no money, and it's just going to, it's the necessity. I just think it's going to have to happen. That balance, if that balance happens because of it, all well and good, brilliant. it's funny, you know, I write what 8 months of the year about county, 4 months of the year about club. That's usually it. But you're always writing it. I don't make too much of a distinction between them. Although in the last few weeks, you've seen on one side some people argue that journalists and what have you we make our beans out of the county scene, and you know, giving out about that on one side and on another as well. It makes no difference to me. I just want to see games be played, as Colm said, and again, we probably have it the wrong way around in some shape or form. But I would still love to see All-Ireland finals being played in September. I would still love to see club finals being played at the height of summer. I'm not going to get my way in that, and I don't think anybody who has their head screwed on is going to get their way with that. There has to be compromise in some shape or form. If it's a guarantee or a minimum number of games for clubs, and the same for county, then brilliant. You know, I think that is happening. I think that's evolving. I think it's just being forced upon us in many shapes and forms this year, and I just hope something can come of it. I just hope it doesn't, you know, this is a crisis. I just hope it doesn't define it, because obviously next year we're going to see lads having to pull their belts in big time.
Yeah.
And for the following years and whatever like that, there are going to be job losses here, and there are going to be clubs under serious pressure, amalgamations, all sorts of stuff because of immigration, and that is coming down the line. I don't think we've only hit the tip of the iceberg in
But
that.
John, there's also a great opportunity for the GEA here, even though there's a great opportunity, for example, with all this money from Europe, to get some of this and to upgrade facilities in every county, and particularly build 3 or 4 good provincial grounds or improve them as it is. So, like, there's money there available at almost 0%. I hope Croke Park take the opportunity now to have a massive investment in maybe half a dozen big grounds around the country. Certainly forget about Cork. Bring the bulldozer into Páirc Uí Chaoimh and knock that monstrosity. That's going to be the biggest white elephant ever in it, and the Curragh should be.
It'll be rocking.
Together.
It'll be rocking on Saturday night.
Yeah, it'll be rocking. The only time there'll ever be a crowd in if you could get Michael Jackson back, and the chances of that are fairly slim. So Curragh, Wacko and Páirc Uí Chaoimh should be buried together.
Somebody's thinking of Navan there and what has to be done to Navan.
You're absolutely right.
You're suggesting like
Well,
kind
if
of
you had 10,000
deal,
seater stadiums, 10,000 in most places would be perfect for all club matches. And, you know, I was asking them in Meath, for example, how many times in the last 5 years was there more than 10,000 at a game? And I think it was only twice.
Yeah.
So, like, if you have 10,000 good stadiums, and if you have a big game, well, tough. That's all that can get into it.
Speaking of Páirc Uí Chaoimh, RTÉ are back showing live GA this weekend with the Cork Classico, the Rockies and the Bars.
No, Glen the Bars.
Glen and the Bars. Jesus, I'll never be let back in again. Sorry, I'm on autopilot here. So there'll be 200 people, including players, officials, and fans in Páirc Uí Chaoimh. Rory,
and media.
The atmosphere will be bouncing.
Yeah, atmosphere will be dreadful, and the unfortunate thing, unlike Sky Sports and the Bundesliga and those broadcasters, we can pipe in fake crowd effects just to try and add something to it. So in an empty Páirc Uí Chaoimh, you're going to have echo, and you're going to have, you know, you'll probably hear seagulls and stuff like that. But it's a pity, because I think you could have easily, given the fact that you've access points all over the ground, left and right, uncovered and covered, you could have easily and safely put in far more than the 200 people that are allowed. But look, from all accounts, the government are looking at that. The flip side of it is it's a good fixture for us. Historically, it was one of the most storied fixtures in Cork hurling. My dad was at the 1977 county final between the two teams. There was 35,000 at it. Like, I mean, it's just incredible when you think of it now, like at a club match. But obviously the two clubs wouldn't necessarily have the same pedigree that they had back then, even though the Glen they're starting to come back. The youngest Cahalane will be on show, and the Great White Hope, as they're saying, is it Jack, I think is his name. So he's something to look out for, and obviously Patrick Horgan will be playing, so everybody's always interested to see how he goes.
We'll finish up now in a second, but I guess, John, the GA are canvassing hard to get at least parity with the North. Is with the 6 counties. Are they having any success from what you've heard?
I don't think we're going to hear anything before the August bank holiday, Mikey, as much as bank holidays, what do they mean anymore, really?
Yeah, every day is Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's it. But like just before we came on, myself and Colm, we were all talking about it. About the surprise we had, Micheál Martin's his own surprise that players and management were included in the 200. He said this in the Dáil the other day, and there was a lot of TDs asking questions. In fairness, they were clearly their county chairman and secretaries had been on to them. Certainly, the Tipperary, there was a strong influence from Tipperary there, and I'm
he
sure
should have invoked Dáil privilege for that one, I think, shouldn't he?
Yeah, but I just found it very surprising that Martin didn't know that the players and the management were included in the 200. 10th of August, with the help of God, we'll be looking at 500.
Big game.
Well, they shouldn't have to wait. Like, that's a simple decision that should be made tomorrow. Like, there's hundreds and hundreds of club fixtures. I was just looking in the Irish Independent yesterday. Every county is chock-a-block with championship fixtures, from senior to junior down to underage for this weekend. I hope tomorrow that they've a bit of cop on and say at least 500. There's not a bit of danger from anybody being out in the open. And if people want to wear visors or masks going to the match, fine, let them at it. But open it up, look. This is absolutely pure, absolute bullshit what's going on. 400 let in the north into games. Now, Micheál Martin is the Taoiseach of the country. He should just make a decision on this.
Yeah, and there's a lot of there's a lot of different bodies now looking at it as well, and kind of it's not just sporting bodies, it's not just the GAA. They're looking at it and saying, looking at beaches on the few sunny days we've had this summer, and saying, there's a lack of fairness, I suppose, is what they're saying, and I don't think anybody's looking to fill the grounds, are they? I think they would just because the 200 is pointless. For most clubs, a lot of them aren't even giving out tickets because it's just going to cause rows, so they're just not letting.
Yeah, well, 500 for most club games around the country would
more than sufficient.
Of everything. You said 500, it would look after things. But I was telling you lads beforehand, Simonstown and Screen playing on Sunday, both clubs got 55 tickets. When they give tickets to the people on the panel, we had 16 tickets left. So that's how silly the whole thing. And of course, it's a massive loss to the finances of the county boards as well, when they really need to be taking in their money. So there's a whole load of angles to this, and I don't think anybody would say that there's any health issue.
Yeah. Well, look, we'll leave it at that, lads. That was a very interesting chat, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us. And please do, if you don't subscribe to the podcast, please do. If you're watching us on YouTube, say something nice about us, and we'll be back again next week. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Possession crucial from this. How much longer will the referee allow? Dublin lead by a point, and there's the whistle. It's over. It's over.
We earned it by winning the last 2 matches on the road, and that's not going to be taken away from us.
But what I love in hurling, I love players that will never give in.
He hits it. It's over the bar. Oh, holy Moses.